Figures with no arms and hollow eyes carved into Utah's red rock might be gods or something else that came down from the sky. Deep in a Mexican cave, explorers claim they've found ancient stones that show aliens trading corn with humans. And in the dark tunnels of a South African cave, a species with chimp-sized brains somehow left behind the world's oldest known symbolic art. These are more ancient cave markings that show advanced technology. In Utah's Sago Canyon, there's a mysterious stretch of ancient rock art. Some of these carvings are over 8,000 years old. They don't look like your typical cave drawings of hunters or animals. Instead, they're these tall, kinda eerie figures with huge hollow eyes, no arms or legs, and in some cases, what look like antennae sticking out of their heads. They look kinda like robots from 1950s B-movies. Naturally, this has caught the attention of people who believe in the ancient astronaut theory. Basically, that maybe these ancient people had actual encounters with visitors from space. One of the standout images is called the Barrier Canyon Holy Man. And here, this towering figure is surrounded by smaller, shadowy people. Clearly, the tall figure is the important one. But were they drawing something they just imagined, or was this something they actually saw and decided to document? So here's a wild one. A group of explorers in Mexico claim that they've found actual proof of ancient contact with aliens. They were digging around in a set of caves between Veracruz and Puebla, and they pulled up what they're calling the stones of the first encounter. Basically, carved artifacts showing beings with long heads, big oval eyes, and even what looked like spaceships. One of the stones apparently shows an alien handing over what looks like a corn cob to a ruler. The group said their search has, quote, yielded totally unexpected results, and they genuinely believe they found the ultimate evidence that alien beings visited Earth thousands of years ago. Local legends talk about a mysterious ship that's been hidden in the area since ancient times, and that's what drew the explorers there in the first place. According to Jose Aguayo, the National Institute of Anthropology and History won't touch this discovery. It's not typical archaeology, he said. And if INAH ever did recognize the artifacts, it would, quote, basically accept one of the most denied facts, the existence of beings not from Earth. Deep inside South Africa's Rising Star cave system, so deep you've got to crawl through tight, pitch-black tunnels to even reach it, archaeologists found engravings that might be the earliest symbolic art ever made. And no, they weren't made by Homo sapiens. The markings, which are made up of lines and crosshatches, some seeming to be crude depictions of animals even, were carved into the rock walls near what appears to be a burial site. But if it wasn't Homo sapiens who etched them though, who was it? A distant human cousin called Homo naledi. They had smaller brains, only about a third the size of ours, but somehow they were making art. This turns out to be legit symbolic art. We're talking about a species that supposedly wasn't smart enough to do this kind of thing, actually doing it. And that messes with the whole bigger brain equals more advanced culture idea. As archaeologist Lee Berger put it, this could rewrite the story of human evolution. In 2022, researchers using 3D scanning technology discovered massive ancient glyphs carved into the walls and ceiling of a cave in northern Alabama. No one had noticed them before because you literally couldn't see them without 3D scans. Some of these figures stretch over 7 feet long and were carved into the low ceiling, meaning the people who made them had to lie on their backs in the dark to do it. The designs include snakes, human-like figures, and shapes, and they're estimated to be over 1,000 years old. It's believed they were made by the Mississippian culture, but nothing else like this has been found in their art, and whoever etched these would have had to have been pretty serious about it. I mean, these figures were carefully carved into the rock. It's hard to reach, and even harder to see. That alone makes it feel like they were hiding something possibly important. Maybe it was part of some ceremony, or maybe it was a message meant for someone in the future. Some researchers think this could have been a symbolic system, a way to pass on ideas or maybe even warnings that we still don't understand. Either way, the size, the location, the weirdness of it all, it makes it hard to believe it was just a random decoration. I mean, after all, it wasn't out in the open. Who'd get to appreciate it? Yeah, these carvings are weird. The Valcamonica petroglyphs found in northern Italy are one of the biggest collections of prehistoric rock art in Europe. Over 140,000 carvings spread across the valley. Most of them are pretty typical for ancient times. You have animals, tools, hunters, ritual scenes, but then you've got these two figures. They've got bulky bodies, what look like tight-fitting suits, and big round heads with what appear to be antennae or helmets. Some people say they look exactly like astronauts. So people who are really into ancient alien type stuff love to point to these two figures as possible proof that early humans might have encountered visitors from another planet, beings wearing spacesuits. Another popular theory is that they might be visitors from the future, which is definitely a fun idea too. Now, obviously these could also be stylized depictions of gods or warriors. Definitely could be the case, but the truth is, nobody really knows for sure, because there's no writing to explain what the artists were trying to get across. In Talampaya National Park in Argentina, you'll find these strange carvings etched into the walls, some of them dating back around 2,000 to 3,000 years. They're known as the petroglyphs of the Cienaga culture, and while some of them show normal stuff like animals, others are a bit harder to explain. One figure in particular that gets brought up a lot is this one here. Look at the big round heads, the lack of a face. They almost look like they're wearing helmets, like spacesuits. The proportions are way off from typical human figures, and there are no clear weapons or tools or clothing to suggest it's a hunter or a warrior. Of course, this is where, again, the ancient alien theories come in. People think these carvings might show beings that early humans saw but didn't fully understand. In 2023, archaeologists digging around the Karga Oasis in Egypt, about 100 miles west of Luxor, came across a weird rock panel. It's now got people debating what the hell it actually shows. At first glance, the carvings look like spiders, webs, maybe bugs caught in the web, and that's exactly what Egyptologist Salim Ikram said it was. Most of the headlines ran with that version of the story. Creepy prehistoric spiders etched into stone, cool enough, but some researchers think there might be more to this. Dr. Derek Cunningham came out with a totally different angle. He believes the patterns are actually ancient astronomy. They line up with important numbers used to predict solar and lunar eclipses. For example, he says the spider-looking shapes are tilted at exactly 13.66 degrees, which matches half of a sidereal month. That's basically how long it takes the moon to line up with the same distant stars again. Then there's Michael Leto, who thinks the symbols represent constellations and zodiac signs, possibly used for some kind of star map. So in a bunch of European caves, researchers started noticing weird marks next to the animal paintings. Not the animals themselves, but symbols, repeating shapes like dots, slashes, crosses, and these odd Y figures. First, everyone figured it was just a really early form of board doodling, but a study in 2023 argued something much bigger, that this might be the world's oldest form of writing. They don't always seem to be random marks, they follow patterns. Researchers think these early humans, some 20,000 years ago, were actually keeping track of time. Specifically, they were recording when certain animals mated or migrated by marking lunar months. One of the lead researchers said it's a, quote, really big deal cognitively, going on to explain it shows they were organizing information outside of their brains, on surfaces, which is basically the first step toward writing and recording data. They were tracking breeding cycles, trying to predict animal behavior, and to think this kind of thing could have been going on during the Ice Age inside pitch black caves, well, that's pretty wild. Deep in southern Russia, in a spot called the Skelnovsky Grotto, now it's kind of hard to tell based on these images, but archaeologists studied some rock carvings here and found that they look a lot like someone's first-hand account of a meteor crashing to Earth. The petroglyph dates back to the Bronze Age. It shows what seems to be a giant object falling from the sky, breaking into pieces, and scattering debris. Researchers think this might be the earliest known eyewitness record of something like this. An ancient person trying to document a meteor explosion the only way they could, by carving it into rock. One team even matched the direction the object was moving in the carving to real landmarks on the ground, like blast zones and impact craters nearby, and it lines up. So whoever made this wasn't just telling a story, they were recording something they saw, something that would have been utterly terrifying, by the way. They probably thought the world was ending. In the remote Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, you'll find the Wandjina cave paintings, ancient Aboriginal artwork that shows figures that are nothing like the usual stick figure hunting scenes or animal drawings you see in other parts of the world. Instead, the Wandjina are drawn with big round heads, little mouths or no mouths at all, massive black eyes, and white faces that almost look like they're glowing. Some are surrounded by halos or lines that shoot out from their heads. And if you're thinking, well, that kind of sounds like your classic alien in modern day, well, you're not alone. The local Aboriginal people say the Wandjina are powerful ancestral spirits, sky beings that brought law, culture, and even rain. Some believe these aren't just mythological spirits, but actual beings that ancient people saw with their own eyes. The mouthless faces, the oversized eyes, the auras, they all feel oddly familiar in today's world of UFO sightings and alien reports. Were the Wandjina just ancient gods, or something they imagined, or could they have been an entity that showed up in the sky thousands of years ago? Humanoid figures with antennae, flying saucers with landing legs, all found in 10,000-year-old paintings that look more sci-fi than Stone Age. These are ancient cave markings that show advanced technology. In the Bastar region of India's Chhattisgarh state, near the town of Charama, archaeologists rediscovered a bunch of rock paintings in 2014 that were pretty incredible. First off, the paintings date back about 10,000 years. Imagine looking up close at something some ancient person from 10,000 years ago painted with their bare hands. Aside from the age though, some of this art looks oddly out of place. A lot of it looks more science fiction than your typical spear-wielding hunters and animals you get with most cave paintings. There are humanoid figures with what look like antennae on their heads. Some appear to be flying in disc-shaped crafts with 3 legs, and a lot of these figures just look kinda, for lack of a better word, alien. Now, is that just a coincidence? Were they depicting gods that they just happened to envision the same way aliens are in modern day, or were they actually seeing something? Archaeologist J.R. Bagat, who studies these closely, said these might be depictions of ancient encounters with extraterrestrials, or at least ancient humans' imagination of alien beings. See, local tribes have legends about the Roela, or the small-sized ones, said to have come from the sky in flying machines, abducting villagers before disappearing. Sound familiar? The Lascaux Caves in southwestern France are some of the most famous prehistoric sites in the world, filled with detailed paintings of animals like bulls, deer, and horses, but beyond the impressive animal art, there's something strange here as well. Abstract signs and dots. Now, could they just be decoration? Sure, but some researchers think these marks might be more than that. Early star charts or lunar calendars. Basically, these prehistoric people could have been tracking the moon's phases or the positions of stars to keep time. That would be pretty nuts, because it means they would have had some understanding of astronomy long before we thought people ever did. It could be much more than just making art for art's sake. They may have been recording knowledge, passing it down for generations. Sticking with France, Chauvet Cave is also packed with some of the oldest and most detailed cave paintings in the world, dating back about 33,000 years. Among the artwork, researchers again spotted a series of dots that some believe aren't just there for the sake of it, but actually show the phases of the moon. The lunar cycle lasts about 29 days. And these dots might have been an early way to track it, basically an ancient calendar. To pull this off, whoever made these marks had to observe the moon over many nights and understand its changes. That means early humans weren't just focused on daily survival, but instead were paying close attention to the sky and time. Tracking the moon would have been super useful too, helping with hunting seasons, gathering, timing rituals. And besides the dots, the paintings themselves are just impressive. There's a lot more detail in these images than you usually see in ancient cave art. There's shading being used here. The animals have more depth and shape to them. They look almost lifelike. And that alone makes these cave markings seem more advanced for the time, but these dots, they could be the earliest evidence of our ancestors mixing art and science in a way we might not expect from people living such a long time ago. Guanyingdong Cave in China has some of the earliest evidence of the lavalos stone tool technique, dating back anywhere from 170,000 to 80,000 years. But what is the lavalos technique? Well, this was a game changer in prehistoric technology, because instead of just smashing rocks together and hoping for the best, you'd start with a chunk of stone, usually flint or something similar, and shape it into a very specific form. This chunk is what archaeologists call a core. The idea was to carefully trim and prepare the surface of this core so that when they finally struck it in just the right spot, a flake would pop off that was already shaped into a useful tool. So they weren't shaping the flake after breaking it, they were shaping the core beforehand so that the flake came off ready to use. And since the shaping was intentional, it was repeatable. They could knock off several usable flakes from one core, all similar in shape and size. That's a huge step up from just hitting two rocks together and hoping something sharp breaks off. Hohlefels Cave in southwestern Germany is a gold mine for ancient stuff. Archaeologists found the Venus of Hohlefels here, which is a tiny figurine carved from mammoth ivory. And yes, that means it was actually carved from a mammoth's tusk. This 2.5-inch figurine is supposed to be a woman. What immediately pops out are the cartoonishly large breasts and hips. In fact, they're so big you can barely see this woman's head. Now, I don't think this was meant to be a dig, although that's possible, but most archaeologists believe this was meant to symbolize fertility. Maybe this was some sort of goddess figure. People back then cared a lot about fertility because survival depended on it. I mean, I guess it still does, but it really did back then. So this figurine was probably super important. Along with that, they found musical instruments made from bird bones and, again, mammoth ivory, flutes with finger holes that could play actual notes, not just one sound. Carving those flutes would have taken very sharp tools and serious skill. I mean, making finger holes without cracking the bone would have been no easy task. The Sun Temple at Mesa Verde National Park in southwestern Colorado was built into a cliff alcove shaped kind of like a big D. The people who built it, the ancestral Puebloans, used real geometry to design it. The shape and structure follow certain patterns, like the 3-4-5 triangle, which is a simple way to make perfect corners. Something called the golden rectangle, a layout that shows up in art, nature, and architecture because it just feels balanced. Obviously, this kind of precision doesn't just happen by accident. They had to know how to measure, how to mark angles, and how to lay everything out so the pieces fit together exactly right. On top of that, parts of the temple line up with the sun during the summer and winter solstices, meaning the builders were also tracking how the sun moved through the sky. That would have helped them keep time, mark the seasons, and plan ceremonies and planting cycles. Blombos Cave is on the southern coast of South Africa, looking out over the Indian Ocean. Inside, archaeologists found pieces of ochre, which is iron-rich clay that turns a rusty red or brown color when it dries. It's soft enough to carve, but durable enough to hold those carvings for tens of thousands of years. People back then would grind it up to make paint or use it as a kind of an early crayon, but what they found in this cave were blocks of ochre with carefully carved patterns. These engravings are around 75,000 years old. Some have cross-hatched lines, some look like grids, others have angles or zigzags. They're more than just random scratches. They were made with tension, using stone or bone tools to create repeated, even patterns, and it's not like they were carving animals or people. You know, the usual stuff you see in cave art. These were abstract shapes, which doesn't sound all that impressive, but think of what this means. They weren't just copying what they saw. They were thinking in symbols. As for what the symbols mean, maybe it was some sort of language, an early form of code, or maybe it was just decorative. Whatever the purpose though, it proves that people that far back were already thinking creatively, instead of just hunting and surviving like animals. Altamira Cave in northern Spain has some of the best preserved prehistoric paintings ever discovered. These were found in the late 1800s, and at that time, people thought they were fake, because no one believed humans that old could make art this good. The paintings date back around 36,000 years. They mostly show bison, deer, and horses, done in natural colors like reds, blacks, and browns. What's crazy though is how lifelike some of these are. Instead of just arbitrarily applying paint to the walls, in some cases they actually use the curves of the cave to give the animals more shape. Beyond that, there are again symbols, dots, and handprints. Some researchers think those markings might have been used to track lunar or seasonal cycles, acting like an early calendar. Tassili Najir is a massive plateau in the middle of the Sahara Desert in southeastern Algeria. Here you'll find thousands of ancient rock paintings and carvings, spread across more than 70,000 square kilometers. Most of it's animals, hunting scenes, day-to-day life, pretty standard for prehistoric art, but there's a small group of figures that really stand out. These ones don't look like hunters or herders or anything immediately recognizable. Some look like they're wearing helmets or full-body suits. A few appear to have large, round heads with no facial features and limbs that are thin and stretched. Some call them the Great Martian Gods. One of the most famous is known as the Roundhead, a figure with a bulbous head surrounded by smaller human-like figures reaching up toward it. Some even appear to be hovering or floating, not standing on any surface. And there are also shapes that look kind of like discs or capsules. Could they be depictions of deities or shamans in ritual clothing? Definitely possible. But what if these deities were actually something they were seeing? Visitors from the sky. The story of the drop of stone starts in 1937 when a Chinese expedition led by Professor Chi Pute supposedly discovered a burial site high in the Bayan Har Mountains near the border of Tibet and China. Inside they claimed to have found small skeletons with large skulls and thin, frail bodies, about 4 feet tall. Alongside the remains were hundreds of round stone discs, each about a foot in diameter, with a small hole in the center and 2 spiral grooves carved into the surface. Those spirals were said to contain thousands of tiny characters that could only be seen with magnifying glasses. Years later, a man named Sum Nui allegedly translated them at the Beijing Academy for Prehistoric Research. The translation apparently told the story of an alien spacecraft that crash-landed in the mountains 12,000 years before. The beings, called the Drapa, had come from another star system and were stranded. Some of the locals accepted them, others did not. The discs supposedly recorded their journey, their crash, their struggle to survive. Nui's report was said to have been dismissed by the academic community. He was mocked so badly that he left China and ended up dying in Japan. And the story resurfaced in 1966 from a Soviet journalist who wrote about the discs. But no museum ever officially displayed the stones, and they've since disappeared. A giant stone platform in Bolivia looks suspiciously like a landing pad, but nobody really knows what it was for. Hidden under Malta, an ancient stone chamber vibrates people's bodies and brains with sound frequencies scientists still don't fully understand. And in Turkey, carvings from over 11,000 years ago might have been tracking the stars or marking time way before humans were supposedly able to do that. These are more ancient rock markings that show advanced technology. Way out in Bolivia, there's this massive carved bedrock known as Samipata, basically a giant flat stone plaza with weird channels and patterns etched into it. Ancient people carved long grooves, circles, and snake-like shapes into the rock. It's famous for being shaped a bit like a landing pad. Some even believe this may have actually been a landing pad. For what? Well, ancient alien ships maybe. A stretch, sure, but it's an interesting idea. The UNESCO description calls it a ceremonial platform that got used by multiple cultures. The Shane, Inca, then the Spanish built on top, but the exact purpose isn't totally clear. So yeah, unless you're buying into the alien landing pad theory, the patterns most likely have something to do with ceremonies or water flow during rituals. Deep underground in Malta, there's this ancient structure called the Hypogeum. And one room inside is known as the Oracle Chamber. It's carved entirely from stone, and if you speak or chant in there, the sound bounces around in a very strange way. Certain tones, especially deep male voices, can cause the whole room and even people standing in other rooms to vibrate. Scientists tested the chamber and found that it naturally amplifies sound at around 110 Hz. That's a really specific frequency, and it just so happens to be close to what brainwaves produce during trance states. So some believe the room was built to create an altered state of consciousness on purpose, like maybe it was used in rituals to connect with something beyond the physical. Göbekli Tepe is over 11,000 years old. That alone is wild. This place was built before the wheel, before farming really took off, and long before metal tools. But what makes it even weirder is the stuff carved into the stone. These massive T-shaped pillars are covered in animals like lions, snakes, vultures, scorpions, and these odd V-shapes and circles that some people think think weren't just for decoration. There's this theory that those V-shapes actually form a kind of calendar, a whole system that tracks months, lunar cycles, and even adds extra days to stay in sync. Basically, people think these carvings might show the builders had a better grip on timekeeping than anyone expected for that era. Others say the whole site might have been designed to line up with specific stars like Sirius or mark things like the summer solstice, which sounds pretty crazy when you realize this was built thousands of years before Stonehenge. There's still debate over what it all means, but even if they weren't charting the stars or inventing calendars, something complex was going on here. In the middle of the desert in southern Peru, you'll find hundreds of rock carvings at Toro Muerto. Most are animals like cattle and felines, but some look like this. More human-like figures, but with huge, round heads that almost look like they're wearing helmets or masks. To fans of ancient technology, those helmets look suspiciously like protective headgear, or maybe even diving suits. Archaeologists say these carvings are part of the Huayacaya culture dating back to 500 CE or so, and probably had some kind of spiritual meaning, but there is something rather sci-fi about them too. Of course, there's no proof it has anything to do with some long-lost ancient technology, but the imagery does make some wonder if they'd been inspired by something not from this world. Rongo Rongo is this mysterious set of carved symbols found on Easter Island. It's found on tablets, staffs, and on the walls of caves, and no one's been able to decode it. There are only about 27 surviving pieces, all weathered or burned, scattered across museums. We've got around 400 unique glyphs, and they're written in a weird back and forth way called reverse boustrophodon. That means you read one line from left to right, then you flip the tablet upside down and read the next line from left to right again. It's like the symbols were carved facing opposite directions on every other line. So the reader had to keep flipping the board back and forth to follow it. So we know how it's supposed to be read, we just don't know what any of it actually says. Some researchers say a few signs seem to count moon cycles or track stuff like family lines or rulers, but we still can't say for sure. Sitting in a quiet little town in Japan, there's this massive rock called Ishi no Hoden. It's huge, about 600 tons, and somehow it looks like it's floating just slightly above the ground, like it's hovering. When you first see it, the shape is super weird too. It's this almost perfect rectangular block with a chunk cut out on one side, and from certain angles it kind of looks like an old school tube TV. The edges are super sharp, the cuts are clean, it just doesn't look like it was made by accident. People have been trying to figure out how ancient builders carved and moved something this size, and more importantly, why it looks like it's suspended. Well, there's water underneath that fills this little basin carved into the rock below. That's what gives it the illusion that it's floating. But there's still a lot of mystery behind this. How was it made? Why was it made? There were no tools found near the site and no records of how it was built or the purpose behind it. The Palpa region in Peru is basically the lesser-known cousin of the Nazca lines. Same kind of thing. There are giant geoglyphs carved into the mountains that are so big you can really only see them from the air. But what makes the Palpa Mountains interesting is that some of these lines and shapes don't just form animals or people, they actually look like runways, like massive landing strips, straight flat paths that stretch across the hills and plateaus with sharp edges and intersecting lines. Some people think this is just ancient ceremonial stuff or astronomy related designs, but others, they think it looks way too much like a place for aircraft to land, which is where you get some alien theories, like maybe these were literal airfields built for flying machines, or at least meant to be seen from above by something in the sky. There's also this one carving near Papa that's this figure with a huge round head and big eyes, and some say it looks pretty alien. No one really knows who made the Palpa lines or how they kept them so perfectly straight across such uneven terrain. They pulled this off without satellites, drones, or planes, which is pretty impressive. Right off the coast of Israel, under about 30 feet of water, there's this ancient site called Atlit Yam. It's a sunken village that dates back around 9,000 years. And what's weird, it has these massive stone circles and standing stones arranged in a pattern. Some people compare it to a mini version of Stonehenge, except underwater. The stones are set up around a freshwater spring, which makes people wonder if it was used for rituals or energy-related stuff. Now obviously energy centers is a loaded phrase. Nobody found ancient power cords or anything, but some researchers think the layout could have had a deeper meaning of some kind. The big question is how it got underwater as well. Sea levels have risen since the Ice Age, but the idea that a whole village with megalithic stonework just sank and got forgotten, it's pretty wild. Out in Arizona, there's this rock carving made by the Hopi tribe, and for decades people have been debating as to what it really means. It's called Prophecy Rock. It shows a long line with different symbols branching off from it, figures, circles. According to some interpretations, it shows two separate futures. One is a straight path, staying connected to nature and balance. The other path branches off and ends in chaos. Some say it represents a future obsessed with technology, war, and destruction. There are also symbols on it that seem to represent sky-related events like stars and comets. Some people say it's just a traditional story, like a visual way the Hopi passed down their beliefs, but maybe it shows they understood patterns in the sky, maybe even how the planets line up over time. Whether that's true or not, nobody's fully decoded every part of the carving. At the ancient site of Baalbek in Lebanon, there's this massive stone platform that just shouldn't exist, not for the time period anyway. There are blocks that weigh over 1,000 tons each. One of them, the stone of the pregnant woman, is over 70 feet long and still sits half buried in a nearby quarry. These aren't decorative stones. They were meant to be moved and placed, but even today we need some incredibly heavy-duty cranes and logistics to pull that off. This was built over 2,000 years ago. Engineers have no solid answer for how the blocks were transported, let alone how they were placed so precisely. Well, what if the builders had access to some sort of technology that's been lost to time? Others go even further, talking about anti-gravity, that maybe the blocks were floated into place somehow. There's no writing that explains how they did it. No tools were left behind. The Romans did build on top of the platform later, but they didn't move the stones. They just used what was already there.